High Commander Kethral pulled himself off the floor of his damaged bridge and screamed for a status report. His tactical officer was shaking as he read from the display shields, "Are completely offline, Commander." The weapon did not drain them or overload them, it simply removed them. Our scientists do not understand how this is possible. Get them back online, Kethral ordered. Get them back online, now. We are trying, Commander, but the shield generators are undamaged. The energy matrix just collapsed. It is like the laws of physics changed in a localized area around our ship. Kethral's communications officer interrupted with panic in her voice. "Commander, I am receiving transmissions from across the fleet. The same weapon has struck 11 other ships. All of them have lost shields." Outside the viewport, Kethral could see one of his cruisers listing badly to one side, with atmosphere venting from a wound in its hull. "How?" he whispered. "How is this possible? They were supposed to be primitive." The human admiral Chun's voice came through the speakers again with that terrible calm that Kethral was beginning to hate. "Commander, I should inform you that our communication specialists have been busy during this conversation. We have cracked your encryption protocols and gained access to your fleet network. As of 30 seconds ago, we have complete visibility into your tactical systems." "That is impossible," Kethral said, but his voice lacked conviction. The communications officer looked up with horror on her face. "She is telling the truth, Commander. I am seeing unauthorized access throughout our network. They are in everything." Admiral Chen continued speaking. "We are not accessing your systems to cause damage, Commander. We simply want information. For example, we now know the names of every officer in your fleet and their service records and their personal correspondence. We know that your second in command has been exchanging messages with members of the Dominion Council about replacing you after this mission. It believes you have grown too cautious in your old age roles." I snapped to his second in command, Vrethtal, who had gone very pale. "Is this true, Commander?" "I would never." Admiral Chun interrupted. "The messages are dated over the past 3 months. Vrethtal, would you like me to read them aloud? I can broadcast them to the entire fleet if you prefer." Kethral drew his sidearm and shot Vrethtal through the head without hesitation. The body collapsed to the deck, and nobody moved to help because nobody wanted to be next. The humans watched all of this through the cameras they had hacked, and Admiral Chun made a sound that might have been a sigh. "Well, that was dramatic," she said. "Moving on, Commander, we have also identified weaknesses in your navigation systems, simple vulnerabilities that your programmers should have caught years ago. I wonder what would happen if we exploited them." Not Kethral started to say, but he was too late. Across the fleet, 29 ships suddenly changed course without warning. Their navigation computers had received new instructions from sources they believed were friendly, and they obeyed without question. Some ships crashed into each other, and some ships jumped to hyperspace with incorrect coordinates, and some ships simply began flying in circles with their crews unable to regain control. Kethral watched in horror as his carefully organized fleet dissolved into chaos. Ships were shooting at each other now as panicked gunners fired at anything that moved. And the humans had not fired a second shot. They had simply whispered lies into the ears of the Vreth machines and let the machines do the rest. "Order all ships to disconnect from the network," Kethral commanded. "Shut down all external communications. We will fight in isolation." But fighting in isolation meant no coordination, and no coordination meant chaos, and the humans knew this. They had studied war for thousands of years, and they had learned that sometimes the best weapon was information. Admiral Chun spoke one last time. "Commander, your fleet has lost 47 ships, 12 to our weapons and 6 to friendly fire and 29 to navigation errors. You have killed more of your own people in the last hour than we have. Earth has suffered 0 casualties. I suggest you leave." Kethral looked at the tactical display and saw the truth of her words. His mighty invasion fleet was broken and scattered and burning. 2 million soldiers were still alive, but they were terrified now, and terror made soldiers useless. He could continue the attack, and perhaps he could still win through sheer numbers. But at what cost? And what else did the humans have hidden beneath their clouds? What other weapons had they been building for 77 years' retreat? He said, and the word tasted like poison in his mouth, all ships retreat to hyperspace. Jump to the rally point. Do not stop for anything. The surviving ships of the Vreth fleet limped toward the edge of the system, with the humans watching them gone. No more. Shots were fired, because no more needed to be fired. The lesson had been taught. Admiral Chun broadcast one final message to the retreating fleet. Tell your leaders that Earth remembers, Commander. Tell them what happened here. Tell them that we have been watching the stars for a very long time, and we have been preparing for visitors, and tell them this. We are coming to Thrall. Heard those words and felt them burn into his memory. He would never forget them. He would never forget this day he had come to Earth expecting to conquer children, and instead he had met something far worse. He had met a species that had spent its entire existence fighting itself and had survived, a species that had turned every disaster into a lesson and every lesson into a weapon, a species that did not know how to surrender. The Vreth Dominion had broken the one rule that the galaxy had lived by for 3,000 years: do not disturb the humans. And now the humans were awake, and they were angry, and they were looking up at the stars with new eyes that saw not wonder but territory, not mystery but opportunity, not neighbors but competitors. The universe had wanted to keep humanity contained on their small blue world forever. But the universe did not get a vote, and neither did the Vreth. Retreat was complete, and the fleet was gone, and Earth hung in space, exactly as it had before the invasion. Blue and green and white and beautiful. But something had changed, something fundamental. Humanity knew now that they were not alone, and they knew that the universe was not friendly, and they knew that survival required strength, and humans were very, very good at becoming strong. Real war had not ended. It had just begun. Ambassador Veltha arrived on Earth expecting to find a unified planetary government ready to negotiate. Instead, they found 195 separate nations with different languages and different laws and different leaders who could barely agree on what day it was. It was chaos, absolute total chaos, and yet somehow it worked. Admiral Chen had been appointed as Earth's primary liaison to the Concord, and she met Veltha at a facility in Geneva with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Welcome to Earth, Ambassador, she said. I apologize in advance for how confusing the next few weeks are going to be. Translator worked perfectly, but the words still made no sense. I do not understand, Admiral. You have achieved faster than light communication and created weapons that bend gravity and defeated an invasion fleet in hours. How can you not have a unified government? Chen laughed, and the sound was genuine. We tried that a few times, Ambassador. It never worked out. Humans do not like being told what to do, not by each other and certainly not by anything else. But you cooperated against the Vreth fleet, Veltha said. Your response was coordinated and precise. Chen nodded. We cooperate when we absolutely have to. When the alternative is death, we can put aside our differences for just long enough to survive, and then we go back to arguing about everything else. She led Veltha through the facility and past rooms full of human officials speaking dozens of languages and waving documents at each other. This seems inefficient. Veltha observed it as Chen agreed. It is slow and frustrating and maddening, but it is also why we are so hard to conquer. You cannot defeat humanity by destroying our leaders, because we have thousands of them. Every nation and every city and every community can function independently if it has to. Have been practicing resistance for our entire history. Veltha considered this as they walked the Concord, had sent them with specific instructions, offer the humans membership and technology and trade, ask for their soldiers and their scientists and their creativity in return. It was supposed to be a simple negotiation between a powerful civilization and a primitive one, but these humans were not primitive. They were something else entirely. They entered a conference room where representatives from a dozen human nations waited with folders full of documents and demands. Veltha began to understand just how complicated this would be. Negotiations lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of arguments and counter-arguments and proposals that were rejected and revised and rejected again. The humans could not even agree among themselves about what they wanted from the Concord. Some wanted technology, and some wanted independence, and some wanted revenge against the Vreth, and some wanted nothing. And Alveole had negotiated peace between species that had been killing each other for millennia. They had never experienced anything as exhausting as negotiating with humans. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Admiral Chun called a private meeting, just the two of them in a small room with no documents and no other officials. Ambassador Chun said, "I want to speak honestly with you, please." Veltha replied, "Honestly would be refreshing. A year ago, we thought we were alone in the universe. We looked up at the stars and dreamed of finding friends out there, civilizations that might teach us and help us become better than we are. And then your Vreth came, and we learned that the universe was not friendly. We learned that it feared us." Chun walked to the window and looked out at the city below. "The Concord does not want us as partners, Ambassador. They want us as weapons attack dogs to fight their battles while they stay safe and comfortable." Tivoli could not deny it. That is essentially correct. They admitted. Chun turned back and her eyes were hard. "Humanity accepts membership in the Galactic Concord, but not on those terms. Not as attack dogs or hired soldiers or disposable muscle. We will build our own ships with our own designs. We will write our own rules of engagement. We'll fight when we choose to fight against enemies that deserve fighting. And we will do something that apparently has not been done in 3,000 years. What is that?" Veltha asked. "We will walk openly among the stars, exactly as we are, all of our chaos and all of our contradictions and all of our stubborn refusal to be what others want us to be. And we will dare anyone to tell us we do not belong." Veltha blinked their many eyes. "The Concord may not accept those terms. Then they are welcome to try conquering us again," Chun replied. "But I would recommend they bring more ships this time." The terms were sent to the Galactic Concord, and the debate lasted another month. But in the end, the Concord agreed, because they had no choice. The humans were awake, and they were building, and they were not going to stop. Better to have them as difficult allies than as enemies. The treaty was signed on a cool autumn day in Geneva with representatives from every human nation and a dozen alien species present. It was messy and imperfect, and satisfied no one completely, which meant it was perfect for humans 5 years later. The first human starship launched from the shipyards that now orbited the moon. It was called the UES Persistence, and it carried a crew of 300 humans from 40 different nations. Its hull was painted with a simple message in 17 human languages and 3 galactic standard scripts. "We came in peace, we can leave otherwise." Ambassador Yathana watched the launch from the observation deck of the Great Assembly. She was older now and weaker, but she had refused to die before seeing this moment. The other delegates watched with her, and their emotions ranged from fear to hope to simple curiosity. "What do you think will happen now?" one of them asked. Harithana made that sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "I do not know," she admitted. "Perhaps they will save us all. Perhaps they will destroy everything we have built. Perhaps they will do both at the same time, because that is what humans do." She turned away from the screen and began the slow walk back to her quarters. "Either way," she said, "it will certainly be interesting." Galaxy had one rule for 3,000 years. Do not disturb the humans. That rule was broken, and it would never exist again. The humans were awake now. They were curious and creative, and they never stopped pushing forward. They were kind and cool. and loyal and treacherous and everything in between. They were chaos given form and purpose, and they were coming, ready. Or not, the galaxy would have to make room, because humanity had found its place among the stars, and they were not going anywhere. This was their universe too now, and they intended to make the most of it. News of the Vreth defeat spread through the galactic concord faster than any ship could travel. Every species with access to the communication networks heard the story, and every species reacted with the same emotion. Fear. The details grew more terrifying. With each retelling, the humans had weapons that bent gravity and erased shields. They could crack any code and infiltrate any network. They had been preparing for alien invasion for nearly 80 years while pretending to be divided and primitive. They had destroyed a fleet of 300 warships without losing a single life. Some of the stories were exaggerated, but not by much. The truth was frightening enough. Emergency sessions convened in the Great Assembly, and ambassadors shouted at each other and demanded answers and pointed fingers at everyone except themselves. The Vreth delegate sat in his chair looking smaller than before, and his confidence had vanished with his fleet ambassador. Euthana of the remnant elders rose to speak, and the chamber fell silent because everyone remembered her warning. "You see now," she said, and her ancient voice carried a weight that silenced all argument. "You begin to understand why my ancestors made the rule, why they carved it into stone and passed it down through generations, why they were willing to let an entire species develop in isolation rather than risk contact." She gestured to the display screens that showed Earth from a distance. Since the invasion attempt 6 days ago, human activity has increased by 400%. They are building ships and launching satellites and constructing facilities on their moon. Our analysts have identified 17 new objects in orbit, and we believe at least 9 of them are weapons platforms. 6 days, the Vreth delegate said weakly. "That is impossible. They cannot have done all that in 6 days." Euthana made a sound that might have been a laugh. "They put a man on their moon 55 years ago using computers less powerful than their children's toys. They built weapons capable of destroying their entire civilization, and then chose not to use them. They cured diseases and split atoms and created thinking machines, all while fighting wars among themselves. Do not tell me what humans cannot do." She turned to face the full assembly. "Our projections suggest that if left alone, the humans will achieve faster than light travel within 1 decade. They have already begun studying the wreckage of Vreth ships that crashed on their surface. Within 2 decades, they will have a fleet capable of defending their system against any attack. Within 50 years, they will be the dominant military power in this quadrant." The chamber erupted in shouting again. Some delegates demanded immediate action, and others demanded patience, and others simply demanded that someone do something. The Vreth delegate stood and slammed all 4 of his fists on his desk. "Then we must strike now," he shouted. "A full Concord fleet with every ship we can gather. We must destroy them before they become too strong." Euthana shook her head slowly. "You would suggest that," she said, "and perhaps you would succeed. Perhaps 1,000 ships could glass their planet before they develop sufficient defenses. Perhaps you could kill 8 billion humans in a single day. But consider what you would be teaching them." The Vreth delegate frowned. "Teaching them what? They would be dead." With the Euthana walked slowly to the center of the chamber. "The humans have already sent ships beyond their solar system," she said. "Small ships with primitive engines, traveling slowly between the stars. They carry records of human culture and human knowledge and human DNA. If you destroyed Earth today, those ships would still exist, and somewhere someday they might be found." The chamber went quiet. And what would those future humans learn from the destruction of their homeworld? Euthana continued. "They would learn that the universe is hostile. They would learn that survival requires aggression. They would learn that their only path forward is conquest." She let that sink in. "You would be creating exactly the enemy you fear. You would be giving them a reason to hate us forever. But worse than that, you might fail." The Vreth delegate scoffed, but the sound was weak. How could we fail with 1,000 ships because they are humans? Euthana said simply, because failure is not a concept they accept. They would survive somehow. They always survive, and then they would come for us with all the fury of a species that is lost everything and has nothing left to lose. She returned to her seat with slow, careful steps. There is another option, she said. We could do something unprecedented. We could talk to them. We could offer them partnership. Instead of war, we could give them a reason to be friends. The debate continued for 3 days and nights. Without pause, delegates argued and threatened and bargained, and slowly a consensus began to form, not because anyone truly believed in friendship, but because everyone was afraid of the alternative. The Vreth delegate cast the deciding vote, and his words surprised everyone. They have something we want, he admitted there. Soldiers and their tactics and their creativity. If we cannot conquer them, perhaps we can hire them. And so the Galactic Concord voted to send a diplomatic mission to Earth, not out of kindness or respect, but out of fear and greed. They would offer the humans technology and trade and membership in the galactic community, and in exchange, they would ask for human warriors to fight their battles and human minds to solve their problems. It was not friendship. It was a business arrangement between a galaxy that had grown soft and a species that had never stopped being hard. The diplomatic vessel departed 1 week. After the vote, it carried a single ambassador chosen for patience and skill and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Ambassador Veltha of the Sith species accepted the assignment with quiet dignity. They were old and wise, and they had negotiated treaties between species that had been at war for centuries. They believed they were prepared for anything. They were wrong. Nobody was ever truly prepared for humans. Ship jumped toward Earth, and Veltha spent the journey studying everything the Concord knew about humanity, the wars and the arts and the science and the contradictions. They read about human music and human cruelty and human love and human hatred. They read about a species that could create the most beautiful things in the universe and then destroy them without hesitation. They read about creatures who would die for strangers and kill for pride. And when they finished reading, they sat in silence for a long time. These are not like any species I have ever encountered, Veltha said. To no one in particular, they do not make sense. They are chaos given form, and the universe has decided to unleash them upon us all. The ship continued toward Earth, and the humans continued building, and the galaxy held its breath. Something was about to change, something fundamental, and nobody knew if it would be for better or for worse. The Vreth fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, and High Commander Kethril looked upon Earth for the first time. It was a beautiful world, he had to admit. Blue oceans covered most of its surface, and green and brown continents broke through the water, and white clouds swirled in patterns across it all. A single gray moon hung nearby like a faithful pet primitive. Satellites cluttered the orbital space around the planet, and radio signals leaked from the surface in 100 different languages. Music and news and entertainment and arguments. So much noise from such a small plasek altered his fleet into standard subjugation formation. The warships spread out in a hemisphere facing the planet, and the troop transports moved to the center where they would be protected until the surface was pacified. A single message was broadcast on all frequencies, translated into the 17 most common human languages. This is High Commander Kethril of the Vreth Dominion. Your planet is now under our control. You will surrender all weapons and military forces immediately. Resistance will be met with complete destruction. You have 1 hour to respond. The message ended, and Kethril settled into his command chair to wait. He expected panic and chaos and frantic attempts at negotiation. He expected the humans to beg. 17 minutes later, a response came through on audio only. This is Secretary General Morrison speaking on behalf of the United Nations. We received your transmission, and we are going to need some time to process this. Please hold. Kithril laughed, and his bridge crew laughed with him. They want us to wait while they panic, he said. How delightfully pathetic. Give them their hour and let them stew in their fear. What Kithril did not know was that the humans were not panicking. They were organizing. Within 3 minutes of receiving the transmission, every major government on Earth had established emergency communication. Within 10 minutes, they had agreed to share all military resources. Within 20 minutes, they had created a joint command structure. Within 30 minutes, they had a planet species that had spent decades arguing about climate change and trade agreements and border disputes achieved complete global military cooperation in less time than it took Kithril to eat his lunch. When the hour ended, Kithril broadcast his demand again: surrender now or face destruction. The response came from a different human, this time a woman whose voice was calm and cold and carried no trace of fear. This is Fleet Admiral Chen speaking on behalf of the United Earth Defense Council, which was established 53 minutes ago. We decline your offer of surrender. Kithril sat up straighter in his chair. Had not expected defiance. You cannot be serious, he said. We have 300 warships in orbit above your planet. You have chemical rockets and primitive nuclear weapons. This is not a fight you can win. Admiral Chen's voice did not waver. We have been tracking your vessels since they entered our system, Commander. We have analyzed your shield frequencies and your weapon signatures and your communication protocols. And what will you do with that information? Kithril sneered. Throw rocks at us, something like that, Admiral Chen replied. We have also noticed that your fleet formation places your command ship at the center, protected by your larger vessels. That is tactically sound against an opponent with equivalent technology. But we are not equivalent. Are we? Before Kithril could respond, the first nuclear warhead detonated against his forward shields. Then the second and the third and the fourth. The humans had launched everything they had in a single coordinated strike. Every intercontinental ballistic missile and every submarine-launched weapon and every nuclear warhead in their combined arsenals rose from the surface and the oceans and streaked toward the Vreth fleet. Thousands of burning trails crossed the sky like the fingers of an angry god reaching up to grab the invaders. The shields held, the warheads exploded in brilliant flashes of light and radiation, and the shields flickered, but they held. The bridge crew stopped laughing and started cheering. Kithril allowed himself a satisfied smile. Fools, he said. They have exhausted their entire nuclear capability and accomplished nothing. Our shields barely felt it. Admiral Chen's voice came through again, somehow still calm. That was not an attack, Commander. That was a calibration test we needed to measure exactly how much punishment your shields could take. Something in her tone made Kithril's secondary hearts skip a beat. We have been preparing for this moment since 1947. Admiral Chen continued. Not all of us believed first contact would be friendly. We have had contingencies deep beneath a mountain in Colorado. A facility that did not appear on any map began powering up systems that have been dormant for decades. In orbit above the planet, 3 satellites that every government had publicly dismissed as conspiracy theories armed themselves in bunkers across the world. Scientists who had spent their careers being laughed at finally got to see if their theories were correct. The humans had never stopped preparing for war. They had just gotten better at hiding it. You see, Commander, Admiral Chen said, we always knew this day might come. We knew we might face an enemy with superior technology, so we cheated. We found a crashed vessel in 1947, and we spent the next 77 years taking it apart and figuring out how it worked. We built weapons based on what we learned. Weapons that your shields were not designed to stop a single beam of light shot up from the surface of Earth. It was not bright, and it was not dramatic. It simply existed for a fraction of a second, and then it was gone, and the flagship of the Vreth Dominion shuddered as its shields vanished completely, and 3 of its decks crumpled inward like paper crushed in a fist. Kithril was thrown From his chair, an alarm screamed throughout the ship, and his tactical officer was shouting words that made no sense unknown. Weapon type and energy signature not in database, and shields offline, and structural damage on decks 7 through 9. What was that? Kethral screamed. Admiral Chung answered him with something that might have been satisfaction in her voice. That? Commander, was gravity weaponized. We have been working on it since 1986. The humans had learned how to bend gravity itself and turn it into a weapon, and they had been sitting on that knowledge for 40 years waiting. Cal felt real fear for the first time in his life. He looked at his tactical display and saw his mighty fleet and saw the small blue planet below, and realized that everything he thought he knew was wrong. These were not primitives. These were predators, and he had just kicked their nest. The rule had existed for 3,000 years, and nobody remembered why anymore. It was carved into the founding stones of the Great Assembly in 17 different languages, and every species in the Galactic Concord knew it by heart. Do not disturb. The humans do not enter the Sol system, not make contact. Leave them alone. The elder races who had written that rule were gone now, and they had taken their reasons with them into silence or death, or whatever happened to species that grew too old for the universe. But the rule remained, and it was treated like holy law. Young species joined the Concord and learned the rule on their first day, and they always asked the same question: why? The answer was always the same: we do not know, but we do not question it either. The humans lived in a small corner of the galaxy around an average yellow star, and they seemed perfectly happy to stay there. They had not developed faster than light travel, and they had not contacted anyone, and they spent most of their time fighting each other over patches of dirt on their single habitable world. The Concord watched them from a safe distance and found them amusing in a primitive sort of way. They broadcast music and mathematics into space, like children shouting into a cave to hear the echo. They sent tiny robots to explore their neighboring planets and celebrated like they had conquered the universe. They were so small and so young and so completely unaware of the vast civilization that surrounded them, and that was exactly how the Concord wanted to keep it. Then the Vreth Dominion decided that the old rules were stupid. Vreth were a young species as galactic time measured things, and they had risen fast, and they had risen angry. In 100 years they had conquered 12 star systems and enslaved or destroyed everyone who lived there. They believed that strength was the only law and weakness was a sin. When they learned about the forbidden zone around Sol, they did not feel fear or reverence. They felt opportunity. High Commander Kethro stood before the Dominion Council with his 4 arms crossed and his sharp teeth showing him what passed for a smile among his people. These humans, he said, are barely capable of leaving their own planet. They have primitive nuclear weapons and chemical rockets, and they cannot even stop fighting among themselves long enough to explore their own solar system. The council listened because Kethral had never lost a battle, and his words carried weight. The old races were cowards, he continued, and they made coward rules, and we are not cowards. I say we take Earth and add it to our dominion. I say we show the galaxy that the Vreth bow to no ancient superstition. The council voted unanimously in favor. 300 warships carrying 2 million soldiers jumped toward Earth that same day. When the Galactic Concord received word of the invasion fleet, they reacted with something close to panic. Emergency sessions were called, and ambassadors screamed at each other, and the Vreth delegate sat in his chair looking smug and satisfied. You cannot stop us, he said, and you know it then. An old voice cut through the chaos. Ambassador Yethana of the Remnant Elders rose slowly from her seat, and she was ancient beyond measure, with her compound eyes clouded and her limbs trembling with age. She was the last of her kind, and she remembered things that others had forgotten. You fool, she whispered, but somehow the whisper carried through the entire chamber and silenced everyone. You absolute fools. The Vreth delegate sneered at her, What could these humans possibly do to us, Old One? We have seen their capabilities, and they are children playing with fire. Ithana made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. 3,000 years ago, she said the humans fought a war among themselves. Small war by their standards, regional, they called it. Lasted 6 of their years, so what the Vreth delegates said, 60 million of them died. The chamber went very quiet. They did that to each other, Ithana continued, and her voice was steady now, even though her body was not for land and for ideology and for wounded pride. 60 million dead in 6 years, not because they had to, but because they chose to. She turned slowly, making sure every delegate could see her face. My ancestors watched them discover how to split the atom, and they watched what the humans did with that knowledge. They built a bomb, and they dropped it on one of their own cities and killed 80,000 people in a single flash of light. And do you know what they did next? Nobody answered. They built another bomb and dropped it on another city 3 days later. And then they spent the next 50 years building thousands more of those bombs and pointing them at each other. They created enough weapons to destroy their world 10 times over, and they kept their fingers on the button for decades, waiting to see who would blink firsty. Ithana sat down heavily. We did not forbid contact because humans are weak. She said, we forbid contact because humans are the most creative and adaptable and absolutely relentless species we have ever encountered. They are apex predators who achieved intelligence and never lost the instinct to hunt. They turned death into an industry and called it progress. She looked directly at the Vreth delegate, and you just gave them a reason to look up. The delegate tried to maintain his confident expression, but something flickered behind his eyes. It is too late, he said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. The fleet is already in transit, then. May whatever gods you worship have mercy on them. Ithana replied, because the humans will not. The session dissolved into chaos, but it was meaningless noise now. The invasion was happening, whether anyone wanted it or not. And somewhere across the galaxy, a fleet of 300 warships carried 2 million soldiers toward a small blue planet that had been left alone for 3,000 years. The soldiers told jokes and sharpened their weapons and talked about how easy the conquest would be. They had never lost a war. They had never faced an enemy they could not crush. They had never met humanity, and they had no idea that on that small blue planet the humans have been waiting for this moment for 77 years. Watching the sky, building weapons that did not officially exist, preparing for the day when something would finally come. The universe had one rule: do not disturb. The humans, the Vreth, had broken that rule, and very soon they would learn why it existed in the first place.